career insight, industry expertise, and professional development. This is the Career Gurus Podcast, your premier source for helping you navigate into a new career. Hosted by Daniel and Matthew. Podcasts are uploaded weekly on all platforms, so make sure you're subscribed.
All right, episode 5 of the Career Gurus Podcast, where we help you get insight into your next career. Daniel, how you doing today?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing great. And today we have our friend Phil Vujinov on the call. Hey, Phil.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, no problem at all. How about we get into it? Tell us a little bit about what you do personally and for your career.
Sure. Well, I've known you, Matt, and you, Daniel, for a while. I consider you both really good friends. Career-wise, I am a securities litigation attorney. So what that means is I do litigation and I represent investors across the United States and also in Europe, Canada, throughout the world, who have been defrauded by their financial advisors. So generally that looks like suing a financial institution or a big brokerage wirehouse, things of that nature. So that's the short summary of what I do.
Okay, very good. Is this for a large firm or is this more of a small independent firm?
No, it's for a small firm. So I graduated law school from the University of Akron, which outside of LeBron, Akron's not super well known. It's a smaller school, but it's a good law school. And in law school, I worked for a regional broker-dealer firm in their in-house counsel department. I was working with one of their general counsels. And there I kind of cut my teeth and learned about the different federal regulations when it comes to regulating these brokerage entities. After that, I started with a small firm in downtown Akron, Scanlon and Elliott. And they had a pretty wide litigation practice. We did a little bit of Finra work representing investors. And then after law school, I ended up taking a job in New York City for half a day, which maybe is a story we could get into in a little bit. But ultimately, I moved back home where my family is and took this job in Cleveland with Chapman Albin. There's 4 attorneys at the firm, so it's smaller. But again, we have a nationwide practice. And I like to think we punch above our weight.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool to hear. Kind of touching upon a little bit what you were talking about. Can you tell us a little bit more about your education and the steps that it takes to actually get where you're at today? Is there certain certifications or is there any specialties to the bar exam that you might need in order to be placed in a role that you're at right now?
Yeah, good question. So in middle school and high school, growing up, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. My dad moved to the United States from the former Yugoslavia when he was 18 and graduated college while learning English with an electric engineering degree, all within 3 years. The smartest guy I know, super hardworking, very good in math. And so growing up, my dad would check on my homework, the homework of my brother and my sister, Christina and Dan, make sure we're doing it right. And then in addition, on weekends, he would give us additional homework. So not only did we have to do all our regular homework, but he would create new math problems for us. And so it was, he really wanted us to succeed and he knew how much work it took because he went through it himself. But he was always disappointed how bad we all were at math. Actually, all 3 of us are terrible at math. Meanwhile, he was doing differential equations at like 15. So my sister ended up being a nurse. My brother's a financial advisor. And I ended up doing business in undergrad at Akron because when you don't know what to do, you go into business. That's what I did. And I kind of coasted through it, living the college life. Wasn't too concerned with the career. I always figured it would work out eventually. I was definitely not diligent. I was not a planner. I had no direction. But I graduated accounting, 4-year bachelor's degree. And I went to my dad and I'm like, hey, Dad, I hate accounting. It's terrible. What should I do? And he's like, I don't know. Why don't you go to law school? So literally a week before the registration closed for the year, I took my LSAT real quick, applied. I had no direction. I just applied to Akron because that's where I went to undergrad. And I got in, I got a good scholarship, and I had no idea what the heck it even meant what it meant to be a lawyer. I had no idea what the coursework would be like. I was just kind of this lost kid stumbling around. But within the first month, I knew I loved it. The reason I knew I loved it is because it's competitive and you have instant feedback. So you either win or you lose. You either get the answer right or you get it wrong. There's no gray area, and it's competitive. You win or you lose. And so right away, I loved law school. It was a lot of reading, but I've always been a big reader. I've always loved reading. I've always been a good writer. And you're reading cases, you're coming up with creative arguments, and so it worked out. So yeah, I did 4 years for my undergrad, and it could be any undergrad degree. It doesn't have to be, specific field. You could do any 4-year degree. And then law school is generally 3 years if you do full time. Generally, the first year of law school, you're not allowed to have a part-time job. They make you focus only on law school. And then usually the summer of your first year, you have an internship. And then a lot of people have internships while they're going to school, their second and third year. Additionally, I got my master's, my MBA, Master's of Business, at the same time. They were kind of overlapping, and there were some economies of scale there. So I just took a few more credit hours and powered through. The MBA courses were a cakewalk compared to the law classes, so it felt easy. And meanwhile, while I was doing all of this, I was working for 2 judges down in the Akron Municipal Court, Judge Cook and Judge Schaefer. And it was awesome experience because in the municipal court, you get a healthy dose of criminal cases, you get a healthy dose of civil cases. And I was kind of running the show, writing opinions for the judges, doing the research, helping out wherever I could. It was an amazing experience. And it served me very, very well throughout my career, learning from a young age, kind of all of the inner workings of the litigation system, how it works. And so anyways, that's a long way to get back to me graduating from law school in 2016, May of 2016. And then after that, you usually, for 3 months after you graduate, you study for the bar exam. So the bar exam was, I believe I graduated in May. I think the bar exam was July or August. And so there's 3 different courses that people usually take to study for the bar exam. There's Barbary and there's a few others, but it's pretty much a full-time job. You study 40 hours a week. There's courses online. So I did that for 3 months and I passed the Ohio bar exam first try. I recently passed the California bar exam. And now I'm rambling. So that's kind of the background on how you get your law degree.
So a couple questions to that. You mentioned you just got the California bar. What does that mean? Is there bars for each individual state, or does this go just by a certain region?
Yeah, another good question. So it's a very archaic system, but each state has its own bar examination and its own group of people who set the requirements for whether you're licensed to practice law in that state. And so generally, as a general rule, you're only allowed to practice law in the state where you're licensed. So if you take the bar exam in Ohio, you're technically only allowed to practice law in Ohio. There's exceptions for arbitrations, which I do. We do a lot of Finra arbitration work. So we have a nationwide practice. I could practice in any state doing that. But again, generally, it's only the state where you take the bar exam. Now, most states have a mechanism where if you've been in practice for, let's say, 5 years, in good standing, haven't gotten arrested, any of that, you could waive in to another state's bar. So you could become a member of that bar and practice there without having to take the bar exam. Generally, most of these states just want money from you. So they're going to gouge you and try to make you pay a huge sum of money to waive in and be able to practice in that state. For California, it's got a little different requirements. So I think everybody's heard of Kim Kardashian, and they've got a special rule for people who don't have a 4-year undergraduate degree. That's what Kim Kardashian's doing. She doesn't have a 4-year undergrad. So she's working as an apprentice for a lawyer, and then she's going to try to take the bar eventually. That's kind of a backdoor way to do it.
Really? How interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So she's kind of trying to do the shortcut, but most people fail because you really do need some kind of college background and law school experience to be an attorney. And so it almost never works, but it's Kim. Maybe it'll work for her. But in California, if you've been licensed for 5 years, you could take kind of a smaller version of the bar. And if you pass, you're licensed in California. That's what I did. I did it over COVID, so it was all virtual on Zoom. Passed it first try, boom, licensed in California. And so now I can practice in California and Ohio. But again, my practice is nationwide. And I even have clients overseas, Dubai, UK, Angola, just because I'm in a specific field where I do arbitration.
Very cool. So Phil, maybe talk to us how you got into, I guess, the financial fraud side of things. Is that because of your counting undergrad, or did you just find this particular type of litigation interesting? Like, what was your reasoning there?
Right. So it was kind of the perfect storm. I had an accounting undergrad, so I had business courses. And then in law school, I worked for a regional broker-dealer firm. I just kind of stumbled into the externship position. And so that gave me further knowledge of the financial industry. And then from there, I worked for a small civil litigation firm in Akron called Scanlon and Elliott. And they did a little bit of the same work I do now. And so I worked on a case with them. It was a U5 defamation case. The short version of that is the broker got a job at a brokerage firm, and to celebrate, he went out partying, and him and his fiance and his friends got a taxi, and they were probably using, they were definitely drunk, but they were probably using some kind of harder drugs. And he ended up getting arrested for assaulting a cab driver. And the brokerage firm ended up terminating him. And every broker has, it's called a Form U5. It's public record, and it'll show any terminations or any bad acts in your past, and it'll be public record, so anybody can look you up. So the brokerage firm filed a Form U5 for this guy and said he was terminated for dishonest acts. He lied to the brokerage firm about his arrest, and then he assaulted a taxi driver. Well, that wasn't the whole story, and we filed a defamation claim in Finra arbitration on his behalf. And I worked with one of the partners at that firm in Akron on that case. We ended up getting a huge victory and had national recognition, huge success. So I had a little bit of experience, but then this kind of leads me to me moving to New York. It all kind of ties in. So I graduated law school. I took the bar, but I didn't have my bar results yet. You usually have to wait 2 to 3 months to get your bar results. And everybody kind of freaks out during that time because you hear horror stories of people failing the bar and then they have to retake it 6 months later. And I was thinking, like, if I failed the bar, what am I going to do? I'm not going to have a job. I'm not going to have an income. So I was freaking out. And so what I did was I took a paralegal position at one of the biggest law firms in the world, based in New York City. The name of the firm is Quinn Emanuel. Quinn Emanuel is the biggest civil litigation firm in the world. They are top tier. They only hire Ivy League. But I kind of found a back door where I would work as a paralegal on one of their cases. They were representing the drug manufacturer Pfizer in a big class action suit, multi-district litigation suit. And so they wanted to bring me on to help run that trial. It was in New Jersey. And then I was going to work there for 2 years and then take the New York bar and hopefully get a job with them. And that would kind of it would kind of hedge. Even if I didn't pass the Ohio bar, I was working as a paralegal anyway, so it wouldn't be a big deal. And it's one of those firms where you work 100-hour weeks, you sleep under your desk, but you get compensated very, very well, even as a paralegal. So I was, again, a young kid out of law school, didn't know what I was doing. So I'm like, yeah, sign me up. I moved to New York City, but right before I moved, I'm the type of guy to just randomly apply to jobs, even if I don't expect to get them. So I applied to the firm I'm at now, not expecting anything. I start the job in New York, and it's my first day. I get into the office. It's in Washington Square Park. It's a great part of New York. It's bustling. They showed me to my desk. I meet all the big partners. But I found out that at my prior firm in law school that I was working at, I had filed a lawsuit on behalf of this guy who took, it was some kind of oral testosterone booster, and he had pulmonary embolisms or whatever. So we filed it's called a multi-district litigation action on his behalf, and we sued a bunch of the pharmaceutical companies. But because I was part of that litigation, I was conflicted out from now representing Pfizer in this big trial. And it was a huge blow to me because I was supposed to help. And so now I couldn't do it. So they threw me on some other kind of whatever nonsense case. But I'm filling out paperwork, and they send a firm-wide email. They have offices all over the world. They send a firm-wide email saying, welcome, Philip Vuyanov, new paralegal, blah, blah, blah. So then they say, okay, that's enough filling out paperwork, go to lunch and then come back. So I go to lunch and I check my phone and I have a voicemail. And so I listen to the voicemail, and it's my current boss. It's the position I had applied for before I moved to New York. And he was offering me a position at his firm. And at this time I had found out I had passed the Ohio bar. So I'm all set. And at that point I called you, Matt. you remember that.
This is true. Yeah.
You were one of my first calls, and I called my parents, and I called a few people, and I decided to take that position. Because I would be a full-blown attorney. I wouldn't have to do 2 years as a paralegal. I wouldn't have to retake the New York bar. And I'm kind of ashamed of this to this day, but instead of going back after lunch, I just sent an email saying I quit on my first day. And I moved back home. But to bring the story full circle, about a year ago, I had a case. I was helping out an investor, and there was an insurance issue, so I notified the carrier or whatever. And Quinn Emanuel, the firm I had worked for, was representing them. So I got to work with them on a case. And of course, they didn't remember me. I was there for half a day, but it was a really cool feeling to be able to do that.
How interesting. I didn't know all the details to the story, actually. So I'm glad you filled me in on that. You mentioned a lot of points of things that you've taken action on. So kind of leading into that, what does a day-to-day look like as a litigations lawyer or attorney, right? What do you do that is internal and external to your job?
Sure. I would break down my job into a few different buckets. So right now we've got about 150 clients spread out among maybe 35 arbitration cases. So a lot of it is interacting with clients, getting their documents, answering questions. So a lot of picking up the phone, and we meet people at the worst moments of their life. A lot of our clients found out that their entire retirement savings was stolen by a broker they trusted. We see a lot of affinity fraud where a church pastor will steal from his congregation. So we meet people at their lowest. And part of my job, honestly, is to be someone they could talk to, someone who will listen to them, and almost like a therapist. A lot of these people, they lost everything. They think they're going to lose their house. They have a wife and kids to take care of. They're ashamed to even tell their family that they were victimized because they're embarrassed by it. And so it's a lot of counseling, talking them through it, saying it's okay, it's not your fault, you did everything right. And it was this individual who his greed drove him to steal from you. It's not your fault. So I deal a lot with my clients, and they range a broad spectrum of sophistication. I have some clients in rural North Carolina who don't even have internet, and I have to send them handwritten letters and mail it to them.
Wow.
And then I have clients, I have one guy in California who's worth $4 billion. He pretty much owns the entire electrical and infrastructure of Southern California, billion-dollar hedge fund managers, everybody in between. Super interesting people. I love working with them. So that's part of the job. The other part of the job is running the cases. So I'm the associate, I'm the senior associate, so I'm the point person. I kind of quarterback the entire cases and get it to a point where we go to trial. And then I work with the partners to get everybody prepped and ready to try the case in front of a jury or in front of a group of arbitrators. It's a lot of work, and the competition is a brokerage firm which has unlimited money, the deepest pockets around. And so, we're a small firm. They have way more resources than us. So we just have to be more creative, and we have to work harder than them. The other part of the case is business development. So our cases, generally a case wraps up in a year to a year and a half. And so as a small firm, you're always looking to develop business, bring in more cases, and get more work for the firm. So I would say those three aspects are what I do primarily, to summarize it and make it really simple. But day to day, it's always completely different. And I think Elon Musk is the one who said, you get paid proportionally to the complexity of the problems you solve. And that's very true. There's a lot of fires we have to put out. There's a lot of problems that need solved. They're all different. They all take different solutions. But it's one of those things where ultimately I'm just a problem solver. So an issue comes up in the case, I have to figure out a way to resolve it, and hopefully get money back in the client's pocket. So every day is different, which is part of the fun of all of it.
Very cool. So kind of picking up on that, what would you say is the most rewarding part of your job? And then what would be, the most challenging part or not so enjoyable?
Most rewarding part, by far, helping the people who are my clients. Some of them still write letters to me telling me how appreciative they are. And some of them, it's not even about the money. It's that they had their trust betrayed, and they want to be able to tell their story and have some kind of final resolution to one of the most traumatic moments in their life. And so the most rewarding part is always helping the client, seeing the smile on their face, being there when they're crying, telling me their story, and being there when I could deliver a check to them that, saves them from having to go back to work at 80 years old. It's seriously one of the most fulfilling jobs ever. And I love it.
So kind of leading into that, like, how do you approach that from an emotional basis? Like, do you find yourself kind of being inept to certain situations anymore? Like you said, like you're seeing people at their absolute worst. They've lost, if not everything, that they've had. How does that affect you in your now personal life?
Yeah, it's a lot of responsibility. I give all of my clients, all 150 from all different time zones, my cell phone number. So they're calling me at all times of the day with problems, questions, comments, just to check in, see how I'm doing. But ultimately, everybody's looking for, another word for an attorney is counselor. They're looking for someone who can guide them through the process, answer their questions, someone who they know, I'm in good hands, they're fighting for me, they're taking care of me, because it is a complex process. Actually, that's one of the reasons I wanted to become an attorney. I forgot to mention this. I was in a car crash when I was 18. I was coming back from soccer. I was in my Honda Prelude, my red Prelude. It was summer. And there was a four-way stop, but it was actually only a two-way stop. And so some of the traffic didn't have a stop, the others did, a stop sign. So I stopped at the stop sign. Long story short, I ended up getting T-boned. It was my fault. And my parents had never been involved in a lawsuit or anything like that. None of my family has. They're all from Eastern Europe. They don't understand the American legal system. And so 2 years later, I ended up getting sued. Insurance, it's pretty typical now, but at the time when we were served with the lawsuit, it was like the world was ending. My parents were freaking out. We're going to lose our house. And I felt awful. And part of the reason I felt awful was because I didn't understand the legal system. And looking back now, I try to help everybody and say, that's totally normal. Don't think twice about it. If you're sued in a car accident, they're going for policy coverage. It's not going to go to trial. Don't worry. But back then, it was a year of having to see my parents cry and stress out about it. It was terrible. And so I wanted to, never be in that position again and to learn about the system. And I think that had a big influence on me going to law school. I apologize. I don't remember what your initial question was. I hope that answered it.
No, that really does. I'm trying to think, like, as you take on more cases, right? Does that seem to affect you in an emotional basis, or for someone trying to get into this career, or someone that's currently in this career, like, could you add to that and say, like, no, this job does not, right? This job is completely, I'm 100% emotionally free of it, or as a whole, does it affect you in the long run, would you say?
It definitely does. It affects me for two reasons. One, I see what my clients are going through and I want some form of justice for them. I want to help them. That is a big emotion. That takes an emotional toll. You're dealing with a lot of emotion there. Secondly, on the plaintiff side of these litigation actions, our firm does pretty much everything on a contingency fee basis. So what that means is a typical investor just got scammed. They lose their retirement savings. They can't pay, my $400 an hour billable requirement. They can't pay me $400 an hour to help them, right? And so we represent most of our investors on a contingency fee basis, which means our firm fronts all of the costs of litigation, which could be hundreds of thousands. And if we win, we get a percentage of the winnings, typically 35-40%. But if we lose, we don't get anything. So we could have put thousands of hours into a case, $100,000 of our firm money into expenses, lose the case, and we don't get a single penny from that. And so it's high stakes stuff when you're dealing with complex, high dollar value litigation against some of the biggest firms. It's very emotional. You put your blood, sweat, and tears into it because there's so much at stake, especially for a small firm. The example I'll give, we're suing a big, Fortune 500 company right now. It's a big brokerage firm in Chicago in the commodity space. We're representing 100 clients, $100 million in losses. I mean, our firm's going to sink a few million into the expenses, and we've been working on it for 4 years. We're scheduling some of the cases out to 2025. There's millions and millions of dollars at stake, not only for my clients, but for the firm. And there are attorneys who get into trouble and actually go bankrupt because they overextend themselves on these contingency fee cases. And so there's so much emotion every day because there's so much at stake, not only for the client, but also for the attorneys who are representing them.
Great. But completely understand that. Kind of with that, I'm curious to know, like, with all of your experience and all that you've learned so far, education-wise, emotionally-wise, career-wise, where do you see yourself moving? Like, what are the options that you have moving forward in your current position?
I am a firm believer that you should not necessarily follow the money. The money will come if you do a good job. You should find a mentor who takes care of you and who will teach you the right way to do things. And so I'm lucky enough to work for an attorney, John Chapman, who is an incredible attorney, very well respected, and I'm learning a ton from him. And so I would say, as long as you have somebody who has your back and somebody who you know you'll learn from, you're either learning or you're earning in any position. And so the first few years of your career, you should be learning. And once you stop learning, go to a position where you're earning. But it has to be one of the two.
So you mentioned finding a mentor and how crucial that is to your career, your development, your growth, and things like that. What other advice would you give to someone, maybe a young lawyer or someone who just passed the bar, is looking for their first job, their first step into the field? What advice would you give them?
Sure, I would give this to any career, not just attorneys. It really does matter who you know. You will not get a position if you do not have some sort of connection with that firm or that individual, unless you're top of your class from an elite school. Otherwise, you really need to know the right person. Develop good connections. Your reputation is everything, so protect it. And what else can I say? Common sense goes a long way, and be someone who other people like to work with. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how accomplished you are. Nobody in the world is going to want to hire you if they do not like you as a person and do not want to deal with you day by day and do not like you, period. So just keep that in mind. And I think anybody who follows those tenets will go far in their career. Oh, last thing, be dependable. Your boss, you're an expendable commodity. Employees usually are. Your boss really has to trust you. So be dependable. If they give you an assignment and a deadline, do not blow it. Get it done. Ultimately, your job is, if you're not the business owner, your main job is to be dependable and make your boss's life easier, period. If you're causing more stress for your boss, you're not going to be there long. So make your boss's life easier, network, be dependable.
Absolutely. So this kind of leads us into our last question with the advice you've given us. So we asked this to everybody that gets on the call. If you could do it all over again, would this be what you would do?
It's a really good question. I see a lot of people in my fields who are unhappy. I think the corporate work setting in general, people who kind of give up on their dreams to sit in a cubicle for the sake of earning a decent salary. I would say there's a lot more to life than that, and the world is big. I think if I were to do it again, I would do something where I can explore, see the world, meet new people, live how we were intended to live, rather than, sitting in front of a screen for 12 hours a day. I still love it. And maybe that's not, a reasonable job that can make money here in America in 2022, but that's what I would say.
Appreciate the honesty more than anything.
Yeah. I think I've for sure learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners will take a lot away from this as well. And I'm sure there's young lawyers or individuals in law school that are just getting started or near the end that will take a lot of advice from our conversation. So thanks for sharing, Phil.
Of course. Love your guys' work, and thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Sounds good. We'll see you guys in the next one. I appreciate you guys for tuning in, and click on the links below.